What's up, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube? This your boy Trey Larkins with Wise Guys Sports. Everybody go and follow Wise Guys on Twitter at Wise Guys _H. Also on Facebook, Wise Guys. And be sure to follow Wise Guys on Instagram at These Guys Know Sports. It's Monday, January the 5th, 2026. Black Monday in the NFL. So I want to come on here and talk about some of these NFL head coaches who were fired today. Obviously, it's Black Monday in the NFL. So we had a few coaches who were fired. We obviously already had a few NFL head coaches who were let go during the season. The Giants, they fired Brian Daboll earlier this season. The Titans, they fired Brian Callahan earlier this season as well. And today, the Raiders fired Pete Carroll. The Cardinals fired Jonathan Gannon. The Browns fired Kevin Stefanski. And the Falcons fired Raheem Morris and their general manager, Terry Fontenot, last night during the Ravens and Steelers game. So, when it comes to the NFL head coaches who were fired today, let's start off with the Arizona Cardinals and Jonathan Gannon. So Jonathan Gannon in 3 seasons as Cardinals head coach, he went 15-36 in 3 seasons. The Arizona Cardinals, they struggled this past season, and there were questions throughout the season about whether or not Jonathan Gannon deserved to get another opportunity to coach the Arizona Cardinals moving forward after this season. And ultimately, the Cardinals organization, they decided to move off of Jonathan Gannon. And Jonathan Gannon is a defensive mind. He knows his defense, and he is a great defensive mind as an NFL head coach. But the issue for Jonathan Gannon in Arizona was they didn't allow Gannon to actually draft a quarterback of his choice. He basically came in and they had already gave Kyler Murray a new contract. And so Kyler Murray was supposed to be the franchise quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals moving forward. And to me, I never really felt like Jonathan Gannon wanted Kyler Murray as his franchise quarterback. And so I kind of felt like he got screwed in a way because he never got an opportunity to be able to draft a quarterback of his choice and develop a quarterback under his stewardship as the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. So to me, I thought he kind of got a raw deal because they fired him after 3 seasons. Again, I know they went 15-36 in those 3 seasons under Jonathan Gannon, but I personally don't really feel like the Arizona Cardinals had much talent offensively. Again, I like Marvin Harrison Jr., but besides Marvin Harrison Jr., I haven't really seen significant talent on the Arizona Cardinals football team, specifically their offense. And so to me, he kind of got caught in a rock and a hard place because he never really truly wanted Kyler Murray as his quarterback. But before Jonathan Gannon took the job in Arizona, Kyler Murray had already signed a new contract. And to me, when I look at the Arizona Cardinals and even Kyler Murray as a quarterback right now, I got questions about Kyler Murray. I don't even know if Kyler Murray is a franchise quarterback that you can build around at this point. Like, I don't know how committed he is to be a franchise quarterback. I don't know if he even has the skill set to be a franchise quarterback. And so to me, I thought Gannon kind of got a raw deal, but he'll get a defensive coordinator job somewhere at some point with another team heading into next season, more than likely. But he went 15-36 in 3 seasons as NFL head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. Got stuck with Kyler Murray. And then Kyler Murray had injuries that he was dealing with this year. But honestly, I felt like Kyler Murray was healthy midway through the season. The Arizona Cardinals organization decided to shut Kyler down so they wouldn't have to pay Kyler Murray the money that he would have been owed had he played the entire season and got some of those incentives in that contract. I think they just decided to shut Kyler down and save some money. But I think it ultimately cost Jonathan Gannon his job. And it's unfortunate because, again, Gannon did not get an opportunity to actually draft a quarterback of his choice and develop him within his system. But Gannon's a defensive mind. He will get a defensive coordinator job at some point in the future. To the Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons, they decided yesterday to part ways with Raheem Morris and general manager Terry Fontenot. This is after Raheem Morris went 16-18 in 2 seasons as the NFL head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. I thought there was a possibility where Arthur Blank, he's the owner for the Atlanta Falcons, I thought there was a possibility where they would bring Raheem Morris back, considering the Falcons, they won 4 straight games to end the season. They finished the season 8-9. Hell, the Carolina Panthers made the playoffs and won the NFC South with an 8-9 record. And Arthur Blank and the Falcons ownership, they still decided to fire Raheem Morris despite the Atlanta Falcons ending the season heading in the right direction with 4 straight wins. They finished the season 8-9. And it kind of changed for the Falcons when they went to Kirk Cousins as their full-time starter. But I also feel like what messed Raheem Morris up was the fact that they signed Kirk Cousins to $100 million, and it was all guarantees in that $100 million 3-year contract that Kirk Cousins signed. $100 million, all guarantees. And then they decided to draft the quarterback from Washington, and I thought that was an issue for the Atlanta Falcons. They ultimately signed Kirk Cousins, and then they drafted Michael Penix. And to me, it didn't make any sense when they drafted Michael Penix after you just signed Kirk Cousins to a 3-year, $100 million deal. I thought that was a mistake. To me, they should have done their homework on Michael Penix, and instead of giving Kirk Cousins all that money, just draft Michael Penix and try to develop Michael Penix to be your future franchise quarterback. So I thought that was a mistake by Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot, the former general manager for the Atlanta Falcons. It made absolutely no sense to sign Kirk Cousins to a 3-year, $100 million deal and then draft Michael Penix. That made no sense whatsoever. And I think that's what ultimately cost general manager Terry Fontenot and former head coach Raheem Morris their jobs. I thought that was a mistake, because if they were doing their homework properly, they could have went and, these head coaches and these general managers, they go out and they scout these players before they draft them. Had they did their proper scouting on Michael Penix, they could have realized, hey, Penix could be our franchise quarterback. So instead of signing Kirk Cousins, let's just draft Penix. That would have been the right decision for the Atlanta Falcons. But I thought Kirk Cousins did decent once he took over as the starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. And after the Falcons beat the Saints yesterday in week 18 and improved to 8-9 on the season and ended the season on a 4-game winning streak, I thought players like Bijan Robinson and Drake London, they supported Raheem Morris. They supported their former head coach. They wanted the Falcons organization to keep Raheem as their head coach. But ultimately, owner Arthur Blank and the Falcons ownership decided to move off of Raheem Morris. And in 2 seasons, Raheem Morris is now out after finishing 16-18 as head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. But I thought the mistake that Raheem Morris made was signing Kirk Cousins to that guaranteed contract, and then going and drafting Michael Penix. That made absolutely no sense. And I thought that was the beginning of the end for Raheem Morris as the Falcons head coach. But we'll see what they do moving forward. It's reports about how they may bring in Matt Ryan as their head coach. So we'll see where the Falcons head to and who they look to bring in as their new head coach moving forward. But man, it's unfortunate because I heard Drake London and BJ Robinson, they supported Raheem Morris as their head coach, and they wanted the Falcons to bring him back. But after finishing 16 and 18 in 2 seasons, Falcons ownership, they decided to go in a different direction. So Raheem Morris is out as the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, and Terry Fontenot, the general manager, is out as the Falcons general manager of the Atlanta Falcons. And Jonathan Gannon is also out as head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. Also, Pete Carroll was fired today by the Las Vegas Raiders after one season in Vegas. It was one and done for Pete Carroll in Las Vegas as their head coach. And the Raiders finished 3-14. They were the worst team in pro football this year, and they have the number one pick in the 2026 NFL draft. And when it comes to Pete Carroll and the Las Vegas Raiders, I felt like it was a bad relationship from the get-go. Pete Carroll came into Las Vegas. He wasn't their first choice. The Raiders wanted Ben Johnson. He's the head coach of the Chicago Bears. The Raiders wanted Ben Johnson, who was the former offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. The Raiders wanted Ben Johnson, but once Ben Johnson decided to go to Chicago, the Raiders basically settled for Pete Carroll. I think Pete Carroll is a legendary head coach. I think he's one of the best head coaches during his prime years in Seattle, leading Legion of Boom. Obviously, he won a Super Bowl as head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. He had 2 Super Bowl appearances on his resume as the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. And again, I think during his prime as an NFL head coach in Seattle, Pete Carroll's name deserved to be in that conversation with the Andy Reids of the world, the Sean Paytons of the world, the Mike Tomlins of the world. But I think Pete Carroll has, honestly, the game has kind of went past Pete Carroll. When I say that, I believe the Raiders specifically need to go young. I think Pete Carroll is a legendary head coach, and he's a Super Bowl champion, and he is to be respected. But I think if you're the Las Vegas Raiders, you should go young at the head coaching position. I thought it was a mistake for them to hire Pete Carroll to begin with. And then Pete Carroll brought Geno Smith from Seattle to Las Vegas with him. And Geno Smith is no longer a franchise quarterback. I think Geno Smith did a great job reestablishing himself as a quarterback in the NFL and being a player that stabilized the position for the Seattle Seahawks when he played for the Seattle Seahawks in prior years. So Geno Smith did a great job and stabilized that position for Seattle, but Geno Smith is declining. And he dealt with injuries this year. I think moving forward, Geno will be a backup in the NFL. Geno Smith is not a quarterback that you can build your franchise around. And I thought it was a mistake for Pete Carroll to actually believe that Geno Smith could be the franchise quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders moving forward. If I were Pete Carroll and I got the job with the Raiders, if I were Pete Carroll and I got the job with the Raiders, I would have tried to draft a quarterback that I could develop, but instead, Pete Carroll decided to roll with Geno with the familiarity that they had and the relationship that they had working together in Seattle. And I think that was a mistake. But again, as far as the Raiders organization, I think it was a mistake to hire Pete Carroll to begin with, honestly. I think they should have went more young. Like you could have went more young at the head coaching position. I think Pete Carroll, his best days are behind him as an NFL head coach. And I think Pete Carroll is one of the best head coaches during his era with the Seattle Seahawks as their head coach. And again, I think Pete Carroll is a great NFL head coach. I just think the game has kind of passed Pete Carroll. And if I'm the Raiders organization, I would have went younger instead of going with an older NFL head coach like a Pete Carroll. But those are my thoughts on the Raiders. Now, when it comes to Kevin Stefanski, Kevin Stefanski was fired by the Cleveland Browns today. In 6 seasons, Kevin Stefanski, he went 45-56. So he won 45% of his games as head coach of the Cleveland Browns. And he was 8-26 in the last 2 seasons as head coach of the Cleveland Browns. And so for me, when it comes to Kevin Stefanski as the Browns head coach, it's 2 sides of this. One side of it is I am glad that Kevin Stefanski got fired because I never felt like Kevin Stefanski wanted Shedeur Sanders to be successful at the quarterback position in Cleveland. I felt like from jump, Kevin Stefanski was not a fan of Shedeur, and he was more of a fan of Dylan Gabriel, despite Shedeur being better than Dylan. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again. Shedeur Sanders was a better quarterback than Dylan Gabriel was. And this season, Shedeur Sanders played the quarterback position better than Dylan Gabriel played this season. And for whatever reason, to me, Kevin Stefanski never connected with Shedeur. Kevin Stefanski never really connected with Shedeur. And I said it was weird because Shedeur could have possibly saved Stefanski's job. That's why I didn't understand why Kevin Stefanski was being so dismissive when it comes to Shedeur Sanders. Because I said during the season, I'm like, Shedeur possibly could help save your job, Kevin. Why are you being so dismissive of Shedeur? It made no sense to me. Made no sense. But I felt like during the season, Kevin Stefanski never tried to actually connect with Shedeur Sanders as his quarterback. And to me, it ultimately cost Kevin Stefanski his job. Now, I actually believe Kevin Stefanski can coach. Let me be very clear. Kevin Stefanski can coach in the NFL. And that's why I believe it's 2 separate things here. On one hand, Kevin Stefanski did not connect with Shedeur Sanders and did not actually develop Shedeur in his rookie season. I don't think Stefanski really helped the development of Shedeur Sanders this season. That's one side of it. The other side is Kevin Stefanski can actually coach in the NFL. In 6 seasons, Stefanski was 45-56. So he won 45% of his games without ever really having an elite quarterback. Now, the thing is, though, because the quarterbacks in Cleveland never actually developed, that is a reason why the Browns fired Stefanski. So I do believe Stefanski can coach, but you can make an argument that Stefanski never actually developed a quarterback in Cleveland to be his franchise quarterback. And that's why he lost his job. But when I look at the Cleveland Browns roster, specifically on offense, what did Kevin have to work with? I mean, I'm looking at the Cleveland Browns this year. from a personnel standpoint, the Browns have arguably the worst personnel from an offensive standpoint. Like, who do they actually have on the offensive side of the ball? Jerry Jeudy, to me, is, out of all those receivers that came out of Alabama, the Jaden Waddles of the world, the Devontae Smiths of the world, like, I believe that Jerry Jeudy's the worst receiver to come out of Alabama. And so, to me, what did Kevin Stefanski actually have to work with as an NFL head coach when it comes to offensive personnel? It wasn't much. So I do believe Stefanski can coach, but I also understand why the Browns fired Stefanski, considering Stefanski never connected with Shador and never developed a quarterback in Cleveland that the Browns organization could build around. But I also feel like Kevin Stefanski, who won NFL Coach of the Year twice, can coach at the NFL level. And I think he will get another opportunity to be an NFL head coach. I just think his time was up in Cleveland. His time was up in Cleveland. And the thing that messed up to Stefanski was when they traded for Deshaun Watson and they gave Deshaun Watson all that guaranteed money, and Deshaun Watson never lived up to the potential or lived up to the contract that they brought him in on and that they signed him for, that ultimately messed up Kevin Stefanski and it set the Cleveland Browns organization back. Let me say it again. When the Cleveland Browns decided to trade for Deshaun Watson and gave him all that guaranteed money, and it did not work out, that set Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns organization back. You gave Deshaun all that money, and Deshaun Watson never actually lived up to his potential and played to his actual ceiling as a quarterback in Cleveland. There's not been one moment in Cleveland while Deshaun Watson's been their quarterback where I felt like that's the Deshaun Watson that I've seen in Houston. I don't know what the hell happened to Deshaun, but Deshaun Watson has not been the same player in Cleveland compared to what he was in Houston. And that is what actually hurt Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns as an organization. But Stefanski is a two-time NFL Coach of the Year. So Kevin Stefanski can actually coach. But again, it made no sense to me why Stefanski was being so dismissive of Shador, considering Shador could have helped Stefanski keep his job had he developed Shador throughout the season. But it brings me to something else, too, that had me thinking about these head coaches. Mike Brown, the owner of the Cincinnati Bengals, came out earlier today, and basically Mike Brown will retain Bengals head coach Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin. And it got me to thinking about Zach Taylor as a head coach. And it had me thinking about Kevin Stefanski as well. I'm looking at Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor, as the Bengals head coach, he was 57, 65, and 1. So he won 47% of his games as the Bengals head coach. I'm looking at a Kevin Stefanski who was 45 and 56 in 6 seasons as head coach of the Cleveland Browns. So he won 45% of his games, right? Zach Taylor, he had back-to-back AFC Championship game appearances and his Super Bowl appearance on his resume, right? But Zach Taylor had the luxury of coaching Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. Meanwhile, Kevin Stefanski has never had the offensive personnel when it comes to the skill position group like Zach Taylor has had in Cincinnati. Let me say it again. Kevin Stefanski, who's a two-time NFL Coach of the Year, never had the offensive personnel that Zach Taylor has. Stefanski's never had a Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, or Joe Burrow to work with in Cleveland like Zach Taylor has had in Cincinnati. And Zach Taylor will keep his job heading into 2026, and Kevin Stefanski lost his job despite being an NFL Coach of the Year twice. Ain't that crazy? That is crazy. Kevin Stefanski's never had the talent that Zach Taylor has had as the Bengals head coach. Kevin Stefanski's never had that in Cleveland. And even without that talent, Stefanski still won NFL Coach of the Year twice. Not once, twice. And he never actually had a franchise quarterback the caliber of a Joe Burrow. Now, some of that could be on Stefanski himself. But Stefanski's never had a Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase or a T. Higgins, but still was able to win Coach of the Year twice. Meanwhile, Zach Taylor has had the luxury of a Joe Burrow, a Jamar Chase, and a T. Higgins, and was able to keep his job. That is amazing to me. And it's crazy. It's crazy, but it just shows you how crazy the NFL is. It's crazy. Like, and a lot of this stuff be politics. Like, Joe Burrow had to support Zach Taylor, but I also feel like Mike Brown never wanted to fire Zach Taylor. I mean, it took Mike Brown years to finally fire Marvin Lewis. There were countless years where the Bengals were first-round exits in the postseason, and Mike Brown never fired Marvin Lewis. He kept Marvin Lewis year after year after year after year after year as the Bengals head coach. Mike Brown never fired Marvin Lewis, despite Marvin Lewis deserving to be fired 3-4 years prior to him actually being fired. And the Browns, they decided to fire Kevin Stefanski despite Stefanski winning NFL Coach of the Year twice. That is crazy. That is crazy to me. Because I feel like despite Zach Taylor having back-to-back AFC Championship game appearances on his resume and actually having a Super Bowl appearance on his resume, despite Zach Taylor having that but not winning anything, Kevin Stefanski, without the talent that Zach Taylor has had at his disposal, has won just as much as Zach Taylor has won. Zach Taylor is 57, 65, and 1. So he's won 47% of his games. Kevin Stefanski is 45 and 56. So he's won like 45% of his games. And also, Stefanski's won NFL Coach of the Year, and yet he's out as Browns head coach. And Zach Taylor will keep his job in Cincinnati with the Bengals. Crazy. But I said it during the season that the Bengals were not going to fire Zach Taylor. Mike Brown's too cheap. He's too cheap. Hell, Mike Brown doesn't even have a general manager. The Bengals don't have a general manager. I know Duke Tobin makes decisions for the Bengals personnel-wise, but the Bengals are so damn cheap, they don't even want a general manager on their team. They don't even want a general manager. That's how cheap the Cincinnati Bengals are. They are so damn cheap. And Mike Brown's always been a cheap owner. He's always been a cheap owner. And to me, the Bengals will be the same old Bengals in 2026, just like they were in 2025 and in 2024. If Joe Burrow is healthy, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, they will score 30 points, and the Bengals defense will give up 40 points. And the Bengals will have one of the worst defenses in the NFL. They fired Lou Adarumo last year, which was a cop-out. I thought Lou Adarumo was one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. They decided to fire Lou Adarumo. They bring in Al Golden, and the Bengals defense was not better in 2025 than it was in 2024. Shamar Stewart was a bust as a draft pick, and Trey Hitcherson dealt with injuries all season long. The Bengals secondary was awful. So to me, if you are Mike Brown and the Cincinnati Bengals organization, if nothing else, I feel like you should bring in another head coach just because we want a breath of fresh air. We want something new, a new voice, and maybe bring in a defensive mind. We know the Bengals are going to score points with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. But maybe, just maybe, we should bring in a defensive mind who can improve the defensive side of the ball. I think right now, a defensive mind as head coach for the Cincinnati Bengals would help the Bengals more than an offensive mind like a Zach Taylor. I think the offense is already an elite offense with Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. Bengals need help defensively, and I think they need to find a defensive mind as their head coach. I think if the Bengals fired Zach Taylor today and they hired Raheem Morris, I think the Bengals would be a playoff team in 2026. Raheem Morris is a defensive mind. So maybe the Buccaneers move off of Todd Bowles. He's the head coach for the Buccaneers. Todd Bowles is a defensive mind. So maybe they move off of Todd Bowles and the Bengals hire Todd Bowles. But they decided to keep Zach Taylor. And I think right now it would be more beneficial for the Bengals to have a defensive mind as their head coach than an offensive mind because their offense is already set with Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. But nevertheless, those are my thoughts on some of these NFL head coaches who were fired today. I thought it was just interesting that the Browns moved off of Kevin Stefanski, despite Stefanski doing more with less, comparing him to Zach Taylor, and the Bengals decided to retain Zach Taylor, despite Zach Taylor not actually fulfilling his end of the bargain and winning a Super Bowl as the Bengals head coach, despite them having the talent to do so, specifically on offense. But those are my thoughts on Black Monday in the NFL. Everybody go and follow Wise Guys on Twitter at Wise Guys _H. Also on Facebook, Wise Guys. And be sure to follow Wise Guys on Instagram at These Guys Know Sports. NFL wild card weekend this weekend. Some big time matchups in the AFC and the NFC. In the AFC, Chargers at Patriots, Bills at Jaguars, and Texans at Steelers in the AFC wildcard matchups. And then in the NFC, Packers at Bears, 49ers at Eagles, and then the Rams at Panthers this weekend. So it's a great weekend of football. I will preview all of the wild card matchups in the NFL sometime this week and come on here and talk some more football with y'all. I'm Trey Larkins signing off. Y'all enjoy y'all Monday.